Hi everyone. I mentioned before that as a young child, as a young boy, I was sexually abused by my mother. And of course, this is a very difficult subject to talk about, especially for me. But I feel like I have to talk about it mainly because there are still some people who know me from back then, who know me as who knew me as a young boy, and they probably thought I was a weirdo or whatever, because I was really shy because of that abuse, and some of them, to this day, they think, oh yeah, he's weird, so, and back then I couldn't explain, why I was behaving that way. Actually, I did try to explain that, there were times where I did try to explain that, where I did say that I'm getting abused by my mother, sexually abused by my mother. But, of course, the adults back then, they didn't believe me because they couldn't imagine that a mother would do that. So it's a very difficult subject, but I do want to talk about it, mainly because of the people who might still know me from that time, to explain why I acted so weird, at least in their eyes, So before I get into that, because it is such a difficult subject, there is something I have to explain right from the beginning, and that is the title. Maybe you were wondering about that, so I have to explain that right away, because actually the title fits perfectly, but maybe some people, actually most people, will not understand it at all. It's more like it sums it up perfectly, but I see the title very differently than other people. They will, when other people see the word homophobia, for example, they will think something very different than what I mean. And what I mean by homophobia is, I also mean what the people, what you think about that. That's what I mean as well. But it has another layer of meaning for me, and that is originally, the word is composed of it's a two-part word. It's homo and phobia, and in spite of what some young people might try to tell you, homo does not mean homosexual. Homo just means man, and phobia means fear. So homophobia means the fear of man. And that sums it up perfectly, because that is how everything started. Because I don't know for certain if my mother herself was sexually abused in her childhood, but there are some hints to that. And when I talk about abuse, I mean sexual abuse. So I'm pretty sure that my mother was herself sexually abused, and so in her case, well, it probably was. I'm not entirely sure, but I do know. What I do know for certain is that she ended up having an abortion. I don't know for certain if that was because she was raped, but it's very likely. But I do know that she had an abortion, and she didn't want that abortion. She was kind of forced to to have that abortion against her will. You know, it's really difficult to get into, because but the bottom line is, it was man, probably also her father, but I'm not entirely sure of that, but very likely her father and whoever was the father of that child, who forced her to have an abortion. And she didn't want that, and she was devastated. Because even though the child was very likely the result of her having been raped, it was still literally like having to kill her own child. At least that's how she felt. And she was, it was terrible for her. She was devastated. She always talked about that, and how sad she felt, and that she was that she felt like she was, that it was like, for her it was like, taking a life, having to take the life of her child. She didn't want that at all, and it was extremely terrible for her, and she felt guilty for the rest of her life because of that. She felt extremely guilty, and actually that's exactly what the perpetrator wants the victim to think. Because of course it's not her fault. It's not her fault that she was raped, and it's not her fault that she then gets forced into having the abortion. That's not her fault. That's the fault of the perpetrator. But that's not the way she felt. She felt like it was her fault. And all that guilt and lasted. She was crushed by that immense feeling of guilt, even though it was not her fault, because she was forced. So it was not her fault. But that she didn't realize that, and of course that's not what the perpetrator wants you to blame yourself. The perpetrator does not want you to realize that it's not your fault, that it's the fault. Of course it's the fault of the perpetrator, but at that moment the victim isn't able to realize that, and isn't able to realize that it's not one's own fault. So that guilt devastated her. And like I said, not only the father of the child was forcing her to have the abortion, but also her own father was forcing her to have the abortion. And the reason for that is because that was it was a while back, and my mother grew up in a very small town, small village, really, a small village, and that was in like in the 70s, so and people in that village were still very conservative, but they weren't Christian at all, but they were like pretending to be Christian. So everybody was just it's a kind of village where everybody is driving an expensive car, and everybody everybody has his own house, not because the people in the village were particularly well off, not at all. All of them were extremely poor, actually, but they were like pretending to be rich, because for my grandparents, their reputation in their village was extremely important, and they weren't Christian at all, because if they would have been Christian, they wouldn't have forced their daughter into having an abortion. So they weren't Christian at all, but they were like pretending to be, they were just pretending, because it was like, the kind of thing to do in that village, So, they figured that it would harm their reputation if the people in that village were to realize that their daughter had a child, a bastard child, so that would, that would just, would be bad for their reputation, and their reputation was very important to them. So they just, had to force her into having an abortion. At least, that's how they saw it, and because their reputation was so important to them, of course, my mother also could not, they would prevent my mother from seeing a psychologist, because, normally when your daughter gets raped at a relatively young age, by the way, you take her to a psychologist, but of course, not my grandparents, because again, if the people in the village, would realize that their daughter was seeing a psychologist, again, in the eyes of my grandparents, that would harm their reputation in their little village. So all that time they prevented my mother from seeing a psychologist. So so my mother just couldn't cope with it, because she didn't have any help, and she just couldn't cope with it, and it would have destroyed her. But she found a solution. Well, or at least so she thought. Of course, the real solution would have been to see a psychologist, but she found another solution, and she thought that, well, if she had another child, and if this time she didn't abort it, she could make up for the abortion. But because it was man who raped her, and man who, or a man, it was a man who raped her, and it was man, plural, several men, but they were all male, who forced her to have the abortion against her will. She was, she was terribly afraid of man. She had a phobia of man. And that was a problem, because you kind of need a man if you want to get pregnant, and that was her solution. But that doesn't work without a man. So what can she do? Well, very simple. She just walks into a bar and tells the next best guy that she's on the pill. That guy at the bar was my father, but after that, she didn't want to have anything to do with him, because he was a guy. She just needed him to get pregnant, so that she can have a child, and of course this time not abort it, so that she can she can she can make her guilt go away, even though at that time she really didn't have anything to feel guilty about because it wasn't her fault, but she didn't realize that. Anyway, so she needed me to ease her conscience, even though it would have been a much better idea to see a psychologist instead, but she didn't want to do that, and she couldn't do that, again, because of the influence of her parents. Of course, her parents again tried to, influence her so that she wouldn't have the child, but the whole point was to have the child. So this time, she didn't let anyone influence her, and she had a child. She had me. So of course I should have the best childhood. She wanted me to have the best childhood ever, so that she could make up for the abortion. And my father would just interfere with all that, and besides, he was an evil man. So, like, as I said, she didn't want to have anything to do with him. He was really a good guy. He always he tried to be there for me, but my mother just completely blocked him, and that was very easy for her to do, because she was genuinely afraid of him, so but that wasn't because of him specifically. It was just because she was afraid of men. But of course, if people can see that she's genuinely afraid of him, and if on top of that she tells them, yeah, he beat me and he beat my child, which is complete bollocks, but people don't know that. They just have this young woman, telling them that, and they can see that she's genuinely afraid of him. So, my father didn't have any chance of seeing me at all, and I never saw him, at least not as a child, or at least, not until I was a teenager, and I was starting to be able to make decisions on my own. Not until then was I able to actually see him. And he always tried to see me, but he had no chance, which is a shame, really, because I think he would have been a good influence. Anybody would have been a better influence than my mother, that's for sure. Up until now, I mean, it all sounds very noble, that was a good intention, right? Making up for the abortion and, having another child and trying to give that new child the best childhood ever. That's a good intention, right? Well, except that I didn't need the best childhood ever. She was already setting the standard way too high. I mean, why would she need to give me the best childhood ever? I would have been completely fine to just have a normal childhood. And of course, if you want something to be perfect, that's impossible. So she's setting herself up for failure, or rather, she's setting me up for failure. Because reaching perfection is unrealistic, so that can't be achieved, and it doesn't have to be achieved, but in her mind it had to, because she was feeling so guilty. It's said that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that, of course, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have good intentions, It just, it just means you shouldn't go to extremes, You want to achieve a good thing, but what are you willing to do to achieve that good thing? Are you willing to do bad things to achieve that one good thing? How far are you willing to go? And my mother, her intention might have been good, but not her methods. Because like I said, because she considered man to be evil, she kind of she kind of separated me from a lot of people, and yeah, she wanted to be there for me 24/7, again, that wouldn't have been necessary at all. You can see she's going to extremes. But she wanted to do that, like I said, to make up for the abortion. And in doing so, she also kind of separated me from everybody else. She didn't want anybody to interfere with that, especially my father, of course. And like I said, he didn't have any chance. He was the last guy who would have been able to see me because, and she also, like I said, I never saw him, but I knew he was the most evil guy because she beat that into me. He was, even though he never saw me, he still had to pay the alimony. And most of the time he was paying much more than he would have had to, because, like I said, he was a nice guy. He meant well. And he thought, even though he was never able to see me, he still wanted to do the right thing and support me, and he voluntarily paid more. He had to support me anyway. I mean, that's the law, right? But he voluntarily paid even more money than he had to. Thinking he did a good thing. Up to this day, he defends it and says, well, I did a good thing. He thinks he did a good thing. What he didn't realize is that, of course, my mother was using that money to manipulate me. I'll get into that later. In her eyes, it started out not as manipulation. It started out, of course, I should have, the most toys, all the toys I wanted. And she did, in fact, use all the money for me, but not in a good way. I'll get into that later on. So, at the very, very beginning, my childhood was actually really great, And at this time, maybe I have to explain a little bit. Maybe I have a tiny bit of an unusual ability. Well, not anything special, but I can remember things that, very far back. I can remember very clearly, things from my early childhood. I mean, like really early childhood. I can remember things, back from when I was a toddler, and I clearly remember them. And but as soon as I got even just a little bit older, basically as soon as I stopped being a toddler, things kind of deteriorated. And the main reason for that is that, a toddler is kind of gender neutral. Of course, objectively speaking, even a baby is not gender neutral. But, a baby is a baby, Like I said, my mother was afraid of man. She wasn't afraid of babies. She loved babies. But, when I started playing with things, that was already, that scared the hell out of her, because, the way I was playing was the way all boys are playing, more or less, you know. It was like I always wanted those little toy soldiers, you know, like tin soldiers, or those those little plastic soldiers. I never got any of them, you know. But you know, that's the way I wanted to play, you know, like something like that, you know, have little toy guns or something, you know. That's what I wanted. I never had them. You know, like I said, I always got all the toys I wanted, except of course toys for boys. I never gotten toys for boys. Because even though I never had them, when I started playing, that was the way I was playing, you know. Just, you know, instead of, because I didn't have a toy gun, I used, you know, just as an example, I might have used a banana instead and would go pew pew with the banana, and that, you know, scared the hell out of my mother, because I was starting to behave like a man. Well, not like a man, but, you know, the way I was playing was the way boys are playing. And, you know, so that just scared the hell out of her. Because you also have to realize that my mother, my mother didn't believe that, how shall I explain this? She didn't believe in an inborn gender identity. Maybe at this point I should explain that my mother was, she was a Communist Party member, and she was even, you know, she never worked in her life, but the closest thing she did to work was, you know, being an official in the Communist Party. You know, she wasn't, you know, it was not, the Communist Party at that time and in that country was not established, so she didn't have like a government position or anything, you know, but, you know, she did have a position in the Communist Party, she was, I guess you could say she was a communist, and that's also, you know, she indoctrinated me with a lot of those theories, and, you know, one of those theories is that, you know, there is nothing that is inborn, and that everything is a social construct, including, of course, gender identity. That there is no inborn gender identity, and that gender identity comes entirely from society. So, you can imagine her shock. You know, me. She was very careful. You know, to never really expose me to normal society. You know, so. She never raised me as a boy. In the beginning, she didn't specifically raise me as a girl either. She kind of raised me gender neutral, so to say. But even though she raised me gender neutral, I started assuming I started having a gender identity. You know, identifying with my actual gender. You know, and she couldn't explain why that happened, because, you know, in her mind, you know, gender identity is, there is no inborn gender identity. It's a social construct. But she didn't expose me to a male gender identity, but I started behaving like a man. You know, that was the last thing she wanted. You know, she was extremely afraid of man. She had a homophobia, so to say. She was afraid of man. So, you know, but even so, I started behaving like a little boy, like the little boy I was. So so she started raising me as a girl. Yeah, starting when I was like 2 years old. what I just talked about, that was all about when I was 2 years old, when I started to play and started playing like a boy. So then she bought me even more toys, but all like, Barbie dolls and stuff like that. Only girls' toys, So until I was from around, starting with me being 2 years old, until I was around 8 years old, I was raised as a girl. Because like I said, because she thought that if she just raised me as a girl, then I would automatically assume that gender identity. And I'm pretty sure she wanted a girl, because like I said, she's afraid of men. Well, the reason she stopped raising me as a girl when I was 8 years old is because I just completely boycotted it. She only gave me girls' toys, and she only let me play with girls, and she did everything for me to become a girl, but it just didn't work. I was just not I wasn't a girl, and I wasn't behaving like a girl, and there was nothing she could do to make me, and she was beating me up a lot. For example, she gave me, like I said, she gave me all those Barbie dolls, and she gave me great stuff, but all of that was just, all of them were toys for girls. And she gave me like that little stove and little kitchen toys, to cook stuff. So I cooked because the stove, it was a toy stove, but it was actually working. It was a real stove, just very small one for children, but it was functional. So I used that stove to burn the Barbie dolls because I hated them. And yeah, she beat me up. She was beating me up a lot. And when she was beating me, she wasn't like slapping me on the butt. She was beating me up. What she usually used to do was, she had those. She had very, very big boots, and she would put them on her hand, and then she would beat me with the boot on her hand. And I was a small child. I was like 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. Was a very small child, and she would use that big boot, to not to beat me on the butt, but to beat me in the face, beat me in the stomach. She also kicked me in the stomach. I was a 4-year-old kid. I was lying on the ground because she was already, she already beat me. She was beating me until I was lying on the ground, and then she continued to beat me, and then she kicked me in the stomach, and she did that a lot, almost on a daily basis, almost. It depended. It depended. If I was behaving the way she wanted me to behave, like in this example, if I was behaving like a girl, then of course she would reward me and buy me even more toys. Of course, again, all of those would be girls' toys, but or if I wanted to go to Disneyland or something, we went. If today I decided I wanted to go to Disneyland, like right now, we immediately went. If I just thought, oh yeah, it would be nice if we go to Disneyland, we went immediately. If I behaved the way she wanted me to. If I didn't, like I said, boot. But even though she was, she was using those methods and was beating me up that hard, she couldn't make me into a girl. She eventually realized, unless she kills me, I'm not gonna be a girl. So that's why she stopped trying to raise me as a girl when I was 8 years old. But of course, all of that is still just child abuse. It's not sexual abuse. So where does the sexual abuse fit in? Well, like I said, she wanted to be around 24/7. She wanted to be always there for me. And she wanted me to have the best childhood, of course, as long as I did everything she said and, for example, behaved like a girl. There were also other things, that wasn't the only thing, basically she forced her entire ideology onto me. And if I did everything she wanted me to, then, she would do anything for me. But of course, that was also very difficult for her. I didn't ask her for that. I didn't needed her to be always there for me. I would have liked it much better if she wouldn't have been. She needed to do that to ease her conscience, even though my childhood was like the worst in actuality. But but that led to a problem, and that is, one of the reasons she was herself sexually abused is because, when she was young, she went out a lot, and she used to hook up with a lot of boys, and and that was actually very important to her, at least in the beginning, until the abortion and until the sexual abuse she suffered. After that, she was very much afraid of men. But before that, she did enjoy men. And of course, with me being around, and with her thinking that she had to be there for me 24/7, she couldn't do that anymore. She didn't have time to go out anymore. I mean, I wouldn't have mind, I wouldn't mind, but she thought she had to be there for me, but she also had some needs. She also had sexual needs that, with her being there for me 24/7, just weren't fulfilled at all. And she didn't have contact with other people, or very little. She sometimes had a little contact. Sometimes she had like friends, but they weren't really friends. She just made friends with certain people because she wanted those people to influence me. Especially when it comes to me behaving like a girl. So like I said, she would set up some friendships with other parents, so that I could play with their girls, so that they could, so that the girls would show me how girls play, or she would befriend gay people. She would befriend homosexuals, and she would ask the gay people to play with me, because I don't know, because she thought maybe that way their homosexuality will rub up, will will rub on to me or something. I don't know what she thought, but yeah, she organized. Yeah, now that I think about it, she actually organized a lot of gay people to play with me, which is actually kind of weird, but not not for her. It was, on the one hand, she thought that would help me behave more like a girl, and on the other hand, well, she wasn't afraid of homosexuals. Like I said, she was afraid of men, of all men, except, of course, she wasn't afraid of homosexuals. So it was very important to her that I actually, start to behave like a girl and, maybe become a homosexual. That was very important to her, because that was the only way she wouldn't have to hate me, yeah. But like I said, that didn't work out, because I can't, how maybe you see that, oh yeah, I'm wearing a My Little Pony shirt and stuff, and maybe I'm behaving a little like, I don't know, some other guy told me, it was actually a brony. and he told me, a lot of people actually told me that they think I am actually gay. I'm not. I'm not, but maybe I behave that way, or, well, not behave that way, appear that way, and maybe one reason for that is also because, like I said, I was raised as a girl, but I assure you I'm not, and I can't change that. I can't change my gender identity. And in that way, I can actually understand homosexuals. I know how hard it can be for them, if their family forces them to forces a gender identity onto them that they don't have. I know what that's like. I'm probably the only or I'm probably one of the very few straight people who actually know what that's like, because that's exactly what I was going through. So like I said, she could have killed me. I couldn't have changed my gender identity. Yeah, but that was also, yeah, that combined with the fact that she wasn't getting any, was what led to my sexual abuse, because because on the one hand, she needed somebody to, she was afraid of men, but she needed, on the one hand she was afraid of men, but on the other hand she was lonely, and she needed a lover, and she was kind of aware that what she was doing was wrong. She was aware of that, and she was aware that it was wrong to force a 4-year-old child, a little child. She was aware that it was wrong to force a little child to be her lover, and she was kind of aware that wasn't right. She was aware of that, but because I was starting to behave like a boy, it had two purposes. On the one hand, it helped her to not feel so lonely, because she wanted me to be her lover, to play that role, So on the one hand, it solved the problem of her being lonely and not getting any, and on the other hand, it served the purpose of punishing me. Because punishing me because I was behaving like a boy. I was not, it was punishment for me for choosing the gender identity that she didn't want me to choose. I'm not going into the sexual abuse itself. Well, at least not in detail. I don't want to ruin your dinner or whatever. I'm actually working on a kind of autobiography where I will go into more details, but this video is getting too long as it is, and it is actually, of course, it is difficult for me to talk about, so yeah.